Hello, and welcome to PulumiUP 2023. Super excited to have you here. My name is Joe Duffy, founder and CEO of Pulumi. And today we're gonna take you on a tour of Pulumi, talk about some exciting news, some exciting momentum in the community with customers, and we might see a new feature or two along the way. So I think a lot of folks know what Pulumi is here, but we have a bunch of new people in the community joining us for the first time. So I want to spend just a minute talking about what is Pulumi, why is it special, why do people love it, and then we'll go from there. So Pulumi is infrastructure as code in your favorite language. Folks familiar with infrastructure as code may have experience with other tools that use domain-specific languages, DSLs, or even markup languages like YAML or JSON. And oftentimes that works fine for getting started, but especially as you scale to modern cloud architectures, the cracks begin to show. And so Pulumi's approach really is to take a different approach. Bring your favorite programming language, whether that's JavaScript or TypeScript, Python, Go. Pulumi is multi-language at its core. And what that means is you get all of the richness of programming languages to express your infrastructure as code. It's the best of programming languages plus the best of infrastructure as code. A key important point is that you still retain all the benefits of declarative infrastructure as code, getting previews before you've done deployments, a full history of who changed what and when, but you're getting that richness. For example, if you need a for loop, do something for every availability zone in AWS, you've got for loops, or if statements or functions, everything we know and love about programming languages. But it's not just the language, it's also the ecosystem around that language. Python, JavaScript, all the ones that Pulumi supports have huge, vibrant communities. They've got great tools like editors and IDEs. So if you're a Visual Studio Code fan, or Sublime Text, or IntelliJ, or even Vim or Emacs, it's just going to work great with Pulumi infrastructure as code. Examples of why that matters, you're going to get statement completion, interactive red squiggles if you make a mistake, right-click, go to definition, right-click to refactor, hover for documentation, really an order of magnitude improvement to productivity. In addition to editors, you've got things like test frameworks and static analysis and all of those other tools in the language ecosystems. We really get to stand on the shoulders of giants. And things like GitHub Copilot just work great because we're using general purpose languages that these large language models just inherently understand. But it's not just about any language, it's any cloud as well. Pulumi supports over 130 different cloud providers. Of course, the major ones like AWS and Azure, Google Cloud. Also private cloud providers such as vSphere or OpenStack. And cloud native like Kubernetes and Helm. But we don't stop there. There's many SaaS providers in the world providing cloud infrastructure these days, like MongoDB Atlas, Cloudflare, Snowflake, and that infrastructure needs to be managed too. And Pulumi takes an approach where you can standardize that across all of them. And then the final dimension that's important to call out is Pulumi meets you where you are. If you're already doing CI/CD with GitHub Actions or GitLab pipelines, you can just use that to change from just application delivery to infrastructure delivery as well. And then, of course, integrating with things like Docker and identity providers such as Okta and so on. And then the net result of this is that the cloud goes from being drudgery to productivity. You just get a lot more done in less time. And it's a lot more fun, too. Less copy and paste. You get to use sort of tried and true engineering practices as you're building your infrastructure as code. And again, really an order of magnitude improvement to productivity. We're not talking about 10%. You're going to feel like you're coding much faster, getting a lot more done, tighter inner development loop. Here, this example is deploying an entire EKS Kubernetes cluster in Amazon in under 15 lines of code, which is pretty impressive. And you don't have to just take my word for it. Our customers, our community, love Pulumi as well. Starburst, amazing customer of ours, doing incredible things in the cloud. They came and told us, hey, now that we've made the shift to Pulumi, we can just get things done that we couldn't have even imagined previously. We can tackle infrastructure projects at an entirely new level of scale. And what that means is they can deliver a lot more business impact a lot faster, innovate, and build an amazing business. And you just look in the community, people say lovely things all the time about, hey, Pulumi, I can't imagine going back to the prior generation infrastructure as code. Nino's quote here is one of my favorite of all time. Sometimes something special comes along that gives you superpowers. That special thing is Pulumi. That is a sentiment shared by many folks in our community. Pulumi is open source, and so community is everything for us. And that community has grown quite a bit over the last year and beyond. But recently surpassed 100,000, so we're up to 130,000 end users in the community. 1,800 customers who have chosen to purchase the commercial edition of Pulumi. We'll talk a little bit later about why Pulumi Cloud helps the open source and helps operationalize infrastructure as code at scale. But amazing, amazing traction with the community. And Pulumi is open source, and so we've got almost 500 open source repos at this point, which is sort of mind-blowing. But the core engine, all the languages, all the SDKs, literally everything about the Pulumi Infrastructure as Code platform is open source. Over 26,000 GitHub stars, 56,000 pull requests that we've merged since the beginning of the project, with over 3,500 open source contributors, and sort of mind-blowingly over 60 million downloads to date. And that's the open source side of things. But of course, we love that Pulumi's open source, but a lot of folks in our community are just trying to get something done. They're just trying to do infrastructure as code, and we love to help with that. We've got over 11,000 folks who've chose to join our community Slack. The whole Pulumi team hangs out there. The community helps the community. Very vibrant, and encourage you to check it out as well. We recently, earlier this year, launched the Pulumi user groups, the PUGs. We've already launched 8 of those across 5 countries. Within the first week of launching, hundreds of people had signed up, and we hadn't even announced it yet. So there's definitely a ton of latent demand out in the community, and you can expect a lot more of this in the years to come. And Pulumi just keeps getting better. And of course, we love that Pulumi supports any cloud and any language, but there's a lot of other features and functionality that are really important when you're adopting an infrastructure as code technology. And here's just a snapshot of some of the exciting things that we've shipped since PulumiUP this time last year. You can see quality of life improvements like stack readmes, which effectively give you what you have with GitHub readmes, but for Pulumi environments, so you can document things about your projects. Improving a lot of the language SDKs, so they're more idiomatic, easier to use, with improvements to .NET, Go, and others. And then major features like Pulumi deployments and Pulumi Insights. Deployments gives you multi-language workflows. Really excited about deployments. We've got some things in store for you today in that area. And then Pulumi Insights, more recently, gives you search analytics and AI over your infrastructure. And these are really exciting technologies that we're really just getting started on today that you can choose to use and help you with your cloud journey. And now to see all that Pulumi goodness in action, I'd like to invite Luke Hoban, Pulumi CTO, onto stage to give you a demo. Welcome, Luke.
Great. Thanks, Joe. It's wonderful to be here. Today I'm going to give a quick lap around Pulumi and show off a few of the new features we've launched over the last few weeks in the core Pulumi platform. All right, well, let's get started with using Pulumi to build cloud infrastructure. We'll start here inside our terminal and just run Pulumi new. When we do this, we see that we have over 200 templates for a wide variety of different use cases for the cloud. We have a variety of cloud providers like Azure, AWS, and a variety of others. And we have support a number of different languages like TypeScript, Python, Go, .NET, and Pulumi YAML. We also have a variety of different architectures. And so here we see we can deploy a containerized service on Azure using Python. We'll go ahead and give this a name, PulumiUP 2023. We'll put in some default metadata, and we'll make sure this is running close to us in the West US. This is going to install a bunch of dependencies, just like any normal Python project. But let's go over into VS Code and take a look at what this code looks like. So here we have our code. Just like we mentioned, this is just a normal Python project with a requirements.txt, a virtual environment, and of course, a main.py file. Now, I'll walk through the code in just a second. But first, the one thing that's a bit unusual or new about Pulumi is that instead of just running our Python program as a Python program, we run it using PulumiUP. And that actually allows us to run this in a desired state configuration mode, just like you would with Azure Resource Manager, CloudFormation, Terraform, Kubernetes, or any other infrastructure as code tool. When we run PulumiUP, we see that it first gives a preview. So it runs my code in a mode where I can see what will happen even before I go and deploy this. We see that what will happen is we'll deploy a few resources, a resource group in Azure, a container registry in Azure, we'll build and push a local Docker image, and then we'll run that in Azure container instances. We can go ahead and say yes, that we do want to deploy this, and it'll go ahead and start deploying that infrastructure. Now this will take about a minute to deploy, and so while we wait for it to finish deploying into Azure, let's take a look at the code and some of the benefits we get from Pulumi's infrastructure as code. So the first benefit is that because this is just code in an existing programming language that has great support within our IDE, we get things like autocomplete and dot completion. We can see all the different APIs that are available, like image, registry image, remote image, and so many more things. We can also see that we can use features like go to definition to dive into that library and understand the details of it. So for example, here we see an overview of how this works, we see examples, and we see the entire set of properties that are available to work with. Now, IDE completion like that is one thing, but we also get that quick feedback loop. So for example, if I come up here and make some changes like this, we'll see that if I have a typo in my code, I immediately get that feedback that there's a problem and I can fix it as I'm going, not having to wait for me to deploy and have that issue affect us later on in the deployment. Similarly, if I pass the wrong kind of data in, like I pass a string instead of a Boolean here, we see that we get that feedback immediately. Overall, this provides a much more strongly typed experience where I get great editor and IDE feedback and productivity from that. Now, in this case, we're using the Azure native provider, which is a full fidelity mapping of the entire Azure platform into Pulumi. This is something we've worked closely with the Azure team at Microsoft on, and it provides the best possible experience for the Azure platform. And earlier this week, we released Azure Native v2, which provides increased performance and usability features for the Azure native provider. This provider offers things that go even further, like enums that tell us all the legal values for this particular setting. So for example, for the SKU on a container registry, we know that there's these exact 4 values, and if I mistype it, I get that same feedback. So a whole bunch of features to help with productivity. Now, this has gone ahead and finished deploying, and so I can click on this to open it up, and we'll see that our app is now running inside Azure. And so here we go, we're running an application inside Azure container instances that shows Hello World. Now, turns out that application was built from this Docker file that's just locally here as part of that template. And so we have this simple Docker file that we were building and pushing locally, and we have the app.py file that we're running. And so let me make a change to this, and we'll see what happens when we go ahead and deploy that. So if I rerun PulumiUP, we'll see that because Pulumi is an infrastructure as code tool that's using desired state, we're not going to just recreate everything. We're going to figure out what is the minimum change possible to get to the new state that we want. And it turns out that minimum change is to make 2 changes to our infrastructure. One is to build and push the new copy of this image, which has that code change I made. And the other one is to update our container instance to run that new code. I can go ahead and click details to see exactly what's going to change, and yes, to go ahead and start deploying those updates. Now this will take a couple minutes, so we won't wait for it to finish, but you get the idea. You can use Pulumi to manage the entire lifecycle of your infrastructure as code projects as they evolve over time. Now, in this example, we were using Azure Native, but Azure Native is just one of the many platforms that Pulumi supports. So here we can see that today we have 137 packages in our registry, and this has been quickly growing over the last year and a half. We can go into any one of these packages, like AWS Classic, and navigate around to see all the different APIs that are available. So for example, coming into S3, looking at the bucket resource, and seeing that we have both the entire API definition, but also a whole bunch of examples for how to work with S3 buckets inside Pulumi in any of our programming languages. But of course, when you have a problem in the cloud that you want to solve with your infrastructure as code tool, it often is not one that somebody has made an exact copy of in an example somewhere. And so for that reason, we recently introduced Pulumi AI. Pulumi AI combines generative AI from OpenAI's GPT-4 with the full breadth of the strongly typed cloud resource metadata from the Pulumi registry. In this simple example, we're just saying create an aws.s3.bucket resource, and Pulumi AI will come back and tell me how to do that using Pulumi. In this case, we asked for it in TypeScript, but it could answer the question in any of our languages. Now this example is fairly simple, and you'll see that the code that it generates is also fairly simple. But we can interestingly ask follow-up questions as well to go iterate on the infrastructure along with the AI assistant. So for example, we could ask it to now show me how to do that. Show me how to do that in Azure. And we'll see that it will come up with a sort of lateral thinking and creativity of how to solve a similar problem, but doing it within the Azure platform. And so Pulumi AI is able to solve problems along with you, help you to come up with the solutions that you want for the infrastructure as code needs that you have. Now, we can do a lot more interesting things as well with Pulumi AI. So I'll jump over to this example that I already generated, where I asked it, I want a static website on AWS. Now, there's not one way to accomplish this. There's many ways I could potentially accomplish this. And in fact, Pulumi AI came up with a really interesting example here of using a higher level package that's available inside the Pulumi registry. Instead of using all the individual lower level building blocks, it's giving me a really simple one-line way to create this using Pulumi. And because it's connected to the entire contents of the registry, we're able to come up with these creative solutions. Similarly, we can do the same thing in other languages. So here I asked the same question, but for Go, and it came up with a similar example, but using the Go language. We can also ask it much more complex queries. Like in this case, I asked it to run Metabase on AWS with a managed Postgres database. This is a meaningfully more complex scenario where I have to generate around a dozen resources in the AWS platform to accomplish this goal. And Pulumi AI was able to come up with a full program that took care of all the details it needs, including understanding all the capabilities of Metabase and what that implied for how I needed to connect that to the AWS services. Now, Pulumi AI isn't perfect. When it generates large pieces of code, sometimes it does make mistakes, just like any developer would when writing this amount of code. The great thing about Pulumi AI, though, is we can take the feedback that we got from it, try it out, and then if there are errors, we can ask Pulumi AI to fix it. And so in this particular case, for example, I followed up and said, that gave me an error message. Can you fix it? And I told it what the error message was. And it said, oh, yep, I made a mistake. I said endpoint port, but I really meant port. And because Pulumi AI is connected into the Pulumi registry, it can make these fixes because it can look up the information it needs about exactly what the API shape is for this infrastructure. That's a quick tour of Pulumi AI. I really think with Pulumi AI, it's never been simpler to take some new idea you've got and integrate it into your infrastructure as code projects. I think this is a really significant new capability in the plans of any Pulumi developer. Now, in both of these last two examples, we've seen how you could take greenfield projects, whether it's with Pulumi New or with Pulumi AI, and solve for new use cases that you have. But we know that for a lot of folks working with their infrastructure as code, they have an existing project that was either provisioned manually through point and click or some previous infrastructure as code tool. And they want to modernize that and bring that into Pulumi. And so one of the things we've been working on recently is the new Pulumi Convert capability, which allows you to convert existing infrastructure as code from other platforms into Pulumi. And early this week, we announced Pulumi Convert support for Terraform, which allows you to take entire Terraform code bases, including modules, and convert them over into Pulumi code. We can look at an example here where we have an open source project that deploys a Vault infrastructure on AWS and uses a variety of different managed services inside AWS to do so. This is a great example, and it happens to be written in Terraform, but we might want to use it in Pulumi, and so let's see how we can do that. We can come back over into our terminal and just run one single command to deploy that. We can run Pulumi Convert. We can say we were converting from Terraform, and we're converting to TypeScript in this case. And we're telling it to place that in this relative folder. When I run this command, it says it's converting from Terraform. After a couple seconds, it'll tell us it's converting to Node.js. And then we'll see that it will install the dependencies it needs to run this. So let me open up that folder that we just created. Now here we have our application that was generated from that open source project that we saw. We have an index.ts file that has all of the config that was available inside the Terraform application, including all the comments and details of the configuration, including the types of the various input variables. We also then have this constructing a new class, a new Vault class. And this Vault class here is a mapping of the module that was being used in the Terraform code over into a Pulumi component. This Pulumi component is just a normal class inside my TypeScript code here. And this normal class implements all the logic that we saw in that previous application. And so we converted over 1,000 lines of code total into Pulumi. When we do this, one of the things to note is, although this is amazing, it doesn't get 100% of the conversion correct right away. There are some places where it doesn't understand some aspect of the original code, and so it emits a not implemented call here. And so although it converted about 1,000 lines of code, there were about a dozen places where it didn't yet know how to convert that piece, and there's a not implemented command here that you can go implement yourself. So we took that work from 1,000 lines of code down to about a dozen lines of code that you need to fix up. And so what that means is we reduced that cost of migrating from your legacy ISC solutions over into Pulumi by about 95%. With Pulumi Convert and support for Terraform, it's never been easier to migrate your legacy ISC over. And we're really excited about the ability for this and Pulumi AI to give you tools to get the productivity benefits of Pulumi for everything that you're doing with your cloud infrastructure. Thanks. That's it for my demo. I'll hand it back over to Joe.
Well, thanks so much, Luke. That was absolutely mind-blowing, incredible to see that in action. I think you get a good sense, having seen the demo, of the amazing productivity I talked about earlier. Pulumi AI makes it easier than ever before to get up and running with any cloud architecture in any language. And then, of course, Pulumi Convert makes it easier for you to adopt Pulumi, no matter where you're coming from, whether that's CloudFormation, Terraform, point and click in the Cloud Console. So it's never been easier to adopt Pulumi. So thanks again. That was great, Luke. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. And from here, I'd like to talk about how teams tend to adopt infrastructure as code, specifically Pulumi, in practice. We saw the getting started experience. It's open source, download a CLI, you run it on your desktop. Once you've decided which language you're going to choose, which clouds you're going to, all of the tools we saw from the CLI, the great experience, Pulumi AI, are really essential. But at this stage, you're really focused on that open source Pulumi infrastructure as code, and you're probably starting with a small number of environments. You're probably doing a proof of concept. Maybe you got one environment, a development environment. Next, you're going to think about going into production. And that's where we start to think about standardization. When it's just infrastructure as code for 1, 2, or 3 practitioners, it's a very different thing than adopting infrastructure as code across your entire team. At that stage in the evolution, you start to think about how do we enforce standards? What does it take to build out a platform? A lot of folks have probably heard about platform engineering. This is kind of a new phrase, but talking about something that we've been doing for a very long time, which is building out these platforms that enable the organization around us. You start to think about how do I ensure best practices are built in, whether those are compliance or security or even just your own cloud conventions in your team. And you'll start to think about going from just manually deploying things to automating deployments in CI/CD, potentially with one of those integrations I mentioned earlier, or running inside of a Kubernetes operator. The main thing is that deployment will be triggered automatically based on a merge commit, rather than a human being running the CLI that we've seen in the demos to date. And that's where Pulumi Cloud really comes in and works better together with the Pulumi open source infrastructure as code technology. And so what is Pulumi Cloud? Well, Pulumi infrastructure as code is 100% open source. I mentioned that already. The Pulumi Cloud is a companion to that open source technology that is really the easiest way to adopt Pulumi at scale. Frankly, it just works. I think a lot of folks coming from other infrastructure as code tools might have experience having to manually manage state and all of the pitfalls that can ensue. Make a merge conflict, you take out production, accidentally check in a secret, and now you might get hacked and have an incident on your hands. There's a lot of ways to get that wrong. With Pulumi Cloud, it just works. Everything's safe, secure, reliable, out of the box. It also facilitates team-wide collaboration. An analogy I sometimes draw is similar to how you can use Git open source completely offline and manage your own repos. It's so much easier to adopt something like GitHub or GitLab to facilitate that collaboration across your team. Pulumi Cloud also has many, many versions of free. For individuals, it's free forever. For teams, we've got a generous free tier. But of course, at scale, we have enterprise and business critical editions with lots and lots of great features that teams going from tens of projects to thousands of projects tend to need. And so the key areas that I'd like to highlight for Pulumi Cloud are the collaboration. When you log in, you've got a dashboard, you've got your projects and stacks, all there, easily searchable. You've got a full history of who has changed what and when for each of those stacks. So if you're ever wondering, hey, who changed this property and why, you can go look at that and not just find the change in Pulumi, but have deep links down to the actual Git commit or pull request that approved that change. Then there's reliable state management. You just don't have to think about how to manage state, how to make sure concurrent access to that state is serialized correctly. The Pulumi Cloud actually has an advanced transactional checkpointing model, which is much more reliable. So if a failure occurs, you can always pick up where you left off. And of course, all that state is being managed for you, including backups and recovery. And if you ever need to go back in time for whatever reason, you can export any previous version of that state file. Got built-in security. I kind of already mentioned this, but it integrates with your security provider of choice, whether that's GitHub, GitLab, Atlassian, SAML SSO, including Okta, G Suite, Azure AD, and others. It's got built-in secrets management and encryption so that you just do the secure thing by default. You don't have to think about a separate secrets management technology that you have to integrate manually. It just works. Policy guardrails with policy as code, fine-grained role-based access control. We recently added support for OIDC for cloud access management so that temporary credentials are easy and secure so that you don't have long-lived credentials sitting in your CI/CD system. Automated workflows. I already mentioned going from manually running the CLI to automation, whether that's CI/CD integration or using Pulumi deployments, which allows you to do server-side deployments using nothing but Pulumi Cloud. And again, all of this is behind a rich REST API to enable you to create your own workflows from there. And then finally, search and insights. We launched Pulumi Insights a couple months ago, which includes artificial intelligence, search over all of your resources, and deep links into all the cloud providers from there. So the combination of all this is just a much better quality of life experience, in addition to having the robustness features that most teams need when they're doing infrastructure as code at scale. And now to see Pulumi Cloud in action, I'd love to invite Meagan Cojocar, Principal Product Manager at Pulumi, up to the stage to give you a demo. Welcome, Meagan.
Thanks, Joe. So as Joe was saying, Pulumi Cloud is the best way to manage Pulumi at scale. Let's walk through it together. Starting on the Pulumi Cloud dashboard, you can find key insights about your organization and monitor activity and your resource count. Let's jump into a latest stack update so you can get the lay of the land. Now you can see and collaborate on every update or deployment within the Pulumi service. We can quickly see what resources were updated, replaced, deleted, and what failed. We can also see if there were any policy violations. Pulumi stores the state for every update, and you can see a timeline of all of the updates, which you can get the state from or you can revert back to. In April, we launched a new feature, as Joe mentioned, called Resource Search. This extended the capability of the Pulumi Cloud beyond just managing your infrastructure as code to managing your entire cloud footprint. When landing on the resources page, you can immediately see insights about your organization, such as the type, package, projects, stacks, and teams by resource count. You can click on search facets to narrow down your search and refine it further. The search syntax is similar to other tools you might have used, like GitHub. Now, let's walk through a use case. Let's say we want to find all of our resources that are in Azure. I can type package Azure. This will return both Azure Classic resources and Azure native resources. Today, I'm super excited to announce that we are taking this one step further and opening up a much larger set of data to search over, resource properties. I was already able to find resources by things like the URN, the parent, the provider, the team they're in, and so on. But today, any property on your resource will be indexed by Pulumi Cloud and searchable after each update. Let's walk through an example. We often hear from customers that they want to search over the cloud tags that they're using. In our environment, we use the cloud tag stack production. So I'm using a dot in the syntax to denote it as a property instead of as a column. And so we know that tags is a property, so it starts with a period, and then the key value is stack production. And you can see all of our resources with that property are returned. Let's walk through another example. This one is also quite common in our feedback from customers. If we want to look by a certain availability zone, I can just type availability zone with the open colon, and that will give me every resource that has the tag availability zone. And we can refine it further by specifying what the value is. So I can say US West 2A, and then it'll further refine it by just those with that value. There can be dozens of resource properties on a resource. And so we can use AI Assist to help us generate the query syntax. AI Assist is our natural language search. In this case, let's say I want to look at my organization and see if we're using any versions of MySQL that are going to be end of life this year. So I'm going to type show my Aurora engines using version 5 and give that to AI Assist, and it will convert into our query syntax. So as you can see here, it knows that I'm looking for an RDS cluster with the engine Aurora and the engine version 5. Now, the reason I said 5 and not 5.7, for example, is this search will catch all of the 5 dot versions. So one resource is returned, meaning that we are running 5.7 in our organization, and so we'll need to go and update it before it's end of life. I can also quickly change this to 8 and see all of our RDS clusters that have already been updated to be MySQL 8.0. We can also run searches to ensure compliance. Pulumi's policy as code will prevent users from deploying resources that are against your internal policies, such as a cloud blob storage that's exposed to the internet. But we can use search to validate compliance use cases. So let's look at this one specifically. S3 buckets in production, and I was lazy here, so I just said read write. Now let's see if AI Assist knows what I mean. Perfect. So this converts it to, I'm looking for the type of resource S3 bucket in the stack production, and it knows that the property is ACL public read write. And luckily, we have none in our production environments. I can just remove the write, and I can see any buckets that are set as public read, which in this case, I know these buckets are intentionally set that way. Now we'll do one last example of property search in the UI. All the searches I've shown you, we can do for any cloud provider. So in this case, instead of having to figure out what the resource type name is, let's ask AI Assist to write us a query to find all bucket objects across the various clouds. So AI Assist will return a syntax for AWS, GCP, and Azure, and it looks like it got all of the syntax correct. Now, you can have all of this data at your fingertips, but searching isn't the only thing you can do with it. You can also export it to perform analytics, which could be something as simple as dumping it into a spreadsheet and using a pivot table, or something as complex as using our data export API to regularly pull it into your data warehouse and build SQL queries or visualizations over it. But the value of resource search or property search isn't limited to the UI and analytics. You can also leverage the resource search API for automation and to create workflows off of your search results. But I won't just tell you, I'll show you. Now, here I have a Python script called search.py, which I can input any search query, and then it will return the results. And so in this case, what I'm going to try and do is check our staging environment to see if there are any instances that are still running. Now, for our staging environment, we try and clean it up every Friday. So I want a quick way to be able to just see if there's any instances still running, and then we can go and make sure that they're destroyed. So in this case, I'm doing the .instance type so that you can specify anything that has an instance type properly, regardless of what the instance type is. I know my project name, and I know that my stack is staging. Now, running this script returns 3 results, and I can check at a glance what the instance type is for each of them to know if there's something I particularly want to clean up. I can also link directly back to the Pulumi console and then click on the AWS console link. So in 50 lines of code, you can write a script that checks every Friday, and you could potentially run it in a Lambda function. And if there's results, you could send those results in a notification to notify your team. You could, if connected to Pulumi deployments, you could also take it one step further and use the Pulumi deployments REST API to destroy these resources instead of having to manually clean them up. We're excited to be unveiling Pulumi Property Search today and can't wait to see what capabilities it unlocks for your organization. I'll now hand it back to Joe to take us through going beyond standardizing your infrastructure.
Thank you, Meagan. That was exciting to see, Pulumi Cloud in action. I think you probably get a good sense of, the total visibility and control that Pulumi Cloud gives you in terms of being able to see what's going on in your organization and finding that needle in the haystack with search, which has just gotten even better. And it's incredible to see that search is actually covering not just finding resources, but also use cases like, cost, security, and compliance. So we're just getting started. Lots more search and AI improvements to come, but it's amazing to see property search in action. All right, so we've seen how to get started with infrastructure as code using Pulumi's open source technology. We've seen Pulumi Cloud and the role that plays in enabling you to have visibility and control over how you're using infrastructure as code in your team. And now we're going to switch gears to seeing how you scale from there. And how do you go from, simple projects, maybe go from 1 team in your organization using infrastructure as code to 10 teams? Very different ballgame at that point. You start thinking about scalability. You go from tens of projects to thousands of projects. That's exactly where things like search really are immensely valuable, because you've got so many resources. Staying on top of actually what's happening in the organization becomes a challenge. You start thinking about security, policy, all of these things become really mission critical. And in addition to that, the use cases start to get more complicated. And that's where we've created something called the Automation API that we haven't seen yet in action up to this point. Automation API really is what if infrastructure as code was not just a command line tool, but a library that you could link with and embed that into a larger piece of software. And that's what Automation API gives you. It enables these advanced use cases. We hear all the time from enterprise customers using Pulumi at scale, and some very exciting use cases like sophisticated orchestration of deployments. Blue-green, canaries, multi-stack deployments, multi-region deployments. It really gives you the ability to customize and build a custom workflow that works for your team. I also see a lot of platform teams building self-serve portals for their team, We see a lot of folks who, I mentioned, going from one team to 10. Well, typically how that works is there's a central platform team, and those 10 business units are consuming what that platform team is building. And oftentimes that can be components, like we saw earlier in the talk, to simplify and standardize on best practices within the team. Or it may be building a self-serve portal, and the Pulumi automation API is perfect for that because you can just really create the portal. When somebody clicks a button, you go do a bunch of infrastructure stuff in response to that. Still getting all the reliability and benefits of Pulumi's infrastructure as code technology. Or maybe you're building custom tools and frameworks. In fact, several folks today, speaking at the conference, Nitric, Firefly, for example, have actually built their own products on top of Pulumi using this capability. And often we see that with startups and enterprises as well, but entire startups have chosen Pulumi to run their software as a service platform. So Cockroach Labs is a great customer of ours. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but they offer a database as a service product where you go click a button in their console and they're spinning up Kubernetes clusters, deploying into them, all very sophisticated infrastructure activities in response to that. And what we found is automation API users tend to manage more with less. They get more done because we're using computers, we're using automation instead of humans to actually perform the deployments. In fact, we find that on average, automation API users manage 10 times more infrastructure than those running the command line manually with traditional IAC experiences. And that's really exciting. And now to see some of that advanced automation at scale, I'd love to welcome Evan Boyle, Principal Engineering Manager for the Pulumi Cloud itself, to come up and give an exciting demo and maybe announce a few exciting features along the way. Welcome, Evan.
Thanks, Joe. As you can imagine, here at Pulumi, we build an awful lot of cloud software to support our business. And as we do that, we need to build tools for ourselves and our customers to be able to do that more efficiently at scale. At Pulumi, we have hundreds of repos managing hundreds of Pulumi programs, stacks, and tens of thousands of cloud resources. It's a real challenge with having that much code that we need to develop and manage on a daily basis. Often I find myself stumbling upon an application such as the Pulumi pet shop that we have right here and needing to make a change. First things first, I need to find the code. Let's use Pulumi Insights to search for pet shop and see if we can find this stack. Here we're able to pull up all of the related resources using resource search, and we can open up the stacks page to find more info. Here we have a link directly to the main branch on GitHub. Let's pull this up and see if we can find the code that we need to change. We're going to open this up inside of GitHub Codespaces. Great, we've got our code open in GitHub Codespaces, and here's the typo that we need to fix. Change Pulumi to Pulumi. All right, we've made our code change, but that's often the easy part. Now we need to figure out how to test our changes, how to run a development environment, and all this is typically very challenging because READMEs get out of date. Sometimes these things aren't even documented at all. Let's start by opening a pull request. We use GitHub pull request create. And here we go. Pull request open in the browser without me having to download any code or get my local environment set up. Luckily, this stack is using Pulumi deployments. Pulumi deployments will automatically deploy a single-use development environment in the cloud that'll allow us to test these changes. Every time I push a commit into this pull request, Pulumi deployments will take that change, deploy it to the temporary environment, which we call a review stack, and automatically deploy those changes into the cloud so that I can share them with my coworkers, collaborate more easily, and make changes safely. The review stack has finished deploying, and we now have a dedicated development environment for this PR. There's even a comment with the link to the website that I can open up, share with my product manager and the rest of my development team for verification. Let's go ahead and open it up. Awesome. These changes look great. Let's go ahead and merge the PR. A review stack is scoped to the lifetime of the pull request. So every time I push a new commit into the PR, that review stack and environment gets updated automatically. So the latest changes are always deployed without me having to do anything. As soon as the pull request is merged, The review stack gets cleaned up automatically by Pulumi deployments so that cloud infrastructure doesn't leak and continue to cost us money. Pulumi deployments also takes care of rolling that change out to my other environments. Here we can see it's kicked off a deployment in my primary environment, and these changes are now going to get rolled out to the other website. Pulumi deployments and review stacks are pretty unique in that they allow you to develop not just application code changes, but infrastructure code changes as well. With review stacks, anyone on your team can pick up a code base, make changes with confidence, and collaborate with others. The main stack is finished deploying, and my changes have been updated in our production environment. Looks great. Pulumi deployments and review stacks can be configured through the Cloud Console, the API, and via Pulumi code. Just a couple of lines within my Pulumi program allow me to specify the repo name, the Git branch, and the directory. That's it. Now I've got Git push to deploy and review stacks enabled on every repository within my organization. Whether you're working on a team of 5 or an enterprise of thousands, Pulumi deployments makes it easy to deliver a workflow that is fast, collaborative, and safe to your entire team. Happy building. Now back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Evan. I think review stacks, honestly, is one of my favorite features we've ever shipped. I think people are going to love it. So looking forward to people kicking the tires, giving it a try. Really helps you ship faster, collaborate with your entire team, and do so with confidence. So thanks again, Evan. All right, so we're on the home stretch. Got a few more exciting things to talk about, and then on to the rest of the conference today. One interesting thing now is, Pulumi is not just an infrastructure as code tool. I think if you've seen with Pulumi Cloud and some of the new capabilities, Pulumi really is a platform. And of course, that's powered by Pulumi's open source flagship infrastructure as code technology that sort of underpins everything we've been able to do in the Pulumi Cloud platform. And we view that as the leading industry's best infrastructure as code. So we love our infrastructure as code, but we are evolving the Pulumi platform over time. You see, we launched deployments last year, which is really all about multi-cloud workflows. You saw with review stacks a taste of what's to come even down the road. Really building that out into a rich workflow capability for all things infrastructure. You saw that we're reimagining sort of the cloud development experience with Pulumi Insights, and especially with AI, being able to generate your infrastructure as code and interact with your cloud in new and exciting ways. And of course, we're not going to stop there. The interesting thing about this platform approach, however, is that we think of this as an integrated platform. This is not a collection of tools that are hard to integrate. It really is integrated in a seamless way. So as you're adopting infrastructure as code, it's easy to go and add deployments to that and get insights over all of that. The common platform ensures that you've got a REST API across all of these services and product offerings. It also means you get a consistent data model and metadata services. So the notion of a cloud resource and its properties, its state, how that's evolving over time is common across all of these product offerings. The manageability capabilities with dashboards, search, analytics are all common. And of course, the security and compliance capabilities we've talked about, like identity, integration, policy, encryption, secrets management, audit trails, and so on, all work seamlessly across these products. And all those partner integrations. You've got over 130 different cloud providers, and each one of those is someone we're proud to call a partner of Pulumi, whether that's AWS or Microsoft or Google Cloud or the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and so on. We've added many cloud integrations over the last year since the last PulumiUP, and every one of those is a partner of ours that we go help customers be successful together. We've also mentioned over 1,800 customers, and that's growing fast. And you can see pretty much every industry vertical, every company size represented here, from innovative car manufacturers like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, to innovators in modern medicine with AstraZeneca, startups that have to move fast, like all of these leading data and AI companies mentioned below, Altana, Pinecone, et cetera. The interesting thing here is data and AI almost always requires moving fast, innovating fast, shipping innovation, and all of that is powered by the cloud because of the immense scale of compute and data required to deliver these. And Pulumi is perfect in those sorts of situations. And so continue to see just amazing traction with customers across all these industries. I did want to briefly highlight 3 success stories, just in case it's interesting to compare the journeys that these customers were on and why they picked Pulumi and when. The first being Mercedes-Benz. I mentioned, they're really making their cars more cloud connected than ever before. And to do that, they really need to put their developers in the driver's seat. They can't think of, the two virtual machines in a database world where infrastructure was an afterthought. It's woven throughout the entire way that they develop software and develop their modern cars. And Pulumi allowed them to give Python to their developers, but have that central platform team that could maintain the control. And we're able to spin up thousands of Kubernetes clusters, and while knowing that they were doing so with Mercedes-Benz best practices in mind. The second is Snowflake, who accelerated the time to market on their path to IPO. They had experience with legacy infrastructure as code tools, and they just knew that the deadlines they were facing were impossible with the legacy IAC technology, in part because they couldn't empower the rest of the team. They only had a few domain experts that could do infrastructure as code. Whereas by picking Pulumi, they were able to give all of their team access to infrastructure as code in Go, which was the language they were already using. And I'm very happy to say they beat their deadlines and continue to double down on Pulumi after that. And the final story is Cockroach Labs. I alluded to this earlier, but Pulumi is actually part of the Cockroach Labs product, where you log in, you click a button to spin up a Cockroach Labs database. On the back end, it's using automation API techniques to spin up Kubernetes clusters, deploy Cockroach database into them, across regions, across clouds even, migrate them over time. It's a good example where modern SaaS products really do often need to tap into modern cloud infrastructure capabilities, and that's where Pulumi's infrastructure as code, specifically with automation API, can really help. So in closing, Pulumi really is the most innovative infrastructure as code technology on the market. You've seen that all the amazing productivity, the amazing capabilities, it just keeps getting better over time. You saw that using Pulumi Cloud in conjunction with Pulumi's infrastructure as code is definitely the easiest way to get started, but also take it to scale so that you can future-proof your infrastructure as code endeavors and make sure you have great reliability, security, collaboration from day one. Almost 2,000 customers, amazing, growing fast. That community also growing fast along with that. And everything you've seen today, I think we've had almost a half dozen, maybe more announcements today. They're all available from Pulumi.com today, along with blog posts, describing how to use those features. So definitely check it out. Reminder, Pulumi is open source, so free to get started, free to use all these things. So definitely check it out. So I want to thank you for being here today. Really love having the community here. Definitely appreciate the time and look forward to an exciting day ahead. So you can see the agenda here. Lots of Pulumi in practice, hearing from Pulumi customers, partners, other members of the Pulumi team. And I'll see you back at the panel at the very end to talk about artificial intelligence and the future of cloud development. Should be really fun. I also wanted to mention, just a quick shout out to our partners. Without them, PulumiUP could not be possible. AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft, Firefly, Clotho, Nitric. Those three partners are actually giving a talk here today. Super excited to see what they have to say. New Relic, Equinix, Port, CircleCI, and Nginx. Definitely appreciate the support from these amazing partners. And then, of course, after the event, we've got an AMA next week on Reddit with the Pulumi engineering team to answer any questions you have coming out of PulumiUP. We're going to do some user group viewing parties and then a bunch of great workshops. So looking forward to seeing you there. But in the meantime, thanks again. Enjoy the day. Enjoy the conference. I hope you learned something that you can take back to your job and have a little fun too. Thank you.